evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the Constitution, the news of the day, and political commentary to you each month. Tonight, James Barrett and Mark Malachowski will be bringing special conversation just for you. Mr. Malachowski, what are we doing tonight?
We're going to start off with our esteemed colleague, Eric Holder, attorney.
You're talking about the Attorney General.
Attorney General. And he's going after North Carolina.
Well, he's going after North Carolina, but what's he trying to do with North Carolina if he catches it?
Well, he wants to make them do the right thing.
What's the right thing?
Well, the right thing is that, see, for many years, Texas and 6 other southern states, anytime they wanted to make a change in their voting laws, they had to get clearance from the Department of Justice.
And why is that, Mark?
Well, that was the Voting Rights Act.
Well, isn't that based on the states in the South that used to operate slavery prior to the Civil War? Does it date back that far, or do they feel that there's a discriminatory policy in each of the southern states that needed special attention by the Attorney General?
Those states, you know, the argument was that they had done poll taxes, they had done discriminatory practices that kept black people from voting. So anytime you wanted to change anything that had anything to do with voting, you had to go to up to the Fed. So it was basically the voting authority in that state was preempted by federal bureaucracy.
So there's a special law, then, I take it, that preempts the 10th Amendment. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it was the Voting Rights Act. And recently, the Supreme Court struck that down, saying that, you know, this was way in the past. Now that, you know, there's not this history, and the states ought to be able to have, you know, the powers that the state normally would have at this point. So that didn't sit well.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? You're telling me the Supreme Court said we do not need the federal government going after each of these states if they want to change their voting laws. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. In other words, it's saying before, the federal government was in charge of the voting activities in each of these states. So those states had little or no authority on their voting issues. And then it came back where the Supreme Court said, well, that's been going on long enough. You know, those states really ought to be able to have some authority of how they run their voting.
So then what right does Eric Holder then have to be able to come down on North Carolina if they've just changed the voting law? I'm missing that part.
Well, you know, there's different branches of government, and, you know, the executive branch can do things by executive fiat up to a certain point. Oh. And depending on the administration, executive fiat extends further than other administrations. So
well, why don't we jump to what Eric Holder is really worried about in North Carolina? What is the law that is really perturbing Mr. Holder?
Well, I think he wants to reinstate the Voting Rights Act, but he wants to call it something different.
Wait a minute, he can't do that just by himself.
Well, but by executive fiat. So they're going to call it, instead of calling it the Voting Rights Act, he wants to call it pre-clearance. So now, so all these states have to go to Eric and say, well, we want to make this change in our voting rules and regulations. Is that okay? But instead of calling it the Voting Rights Act, they want to call it pre-clearance. So they've come up with a different term.
Oh, I understand. They changed terminology so they could do the same old thing, even though the Supreme Court said they couldn't do it.
Yeah, it was struck down, but now they want to say, instead of having it, you know, be a law, we want to do it by executive fiat, and we want to change the nomenclature on it.
Well, I hate to say this, but didn't we cover something like this under the NLRB and several other issues that the government's been imposing on the country that weren't really in line with the Supreme Court decisions?
Well, yeah, there's a variety of those, but I'm saying this one, what he's saying is like, okay, one of the things they didn't like in North Carolina is they said, well, we want to have voters before they vote present an ID.
Wait a minute, but there's other states that already asked that voters are supposed to have a government-issued ID. So what Eric Holder doesn't want to do is he doesn't believe that voters should identify themselves at the time they go to vote?
Well, what Holder would say is that this is discriminatory against minorities, students, and the poor because they're unable to get any type of ID.
Well, I don't know, Mark. I don't know about you, but I had a drive here tonight, and I drive to my job, and I drive to pick my children up, and there's something called a driver's license that you have to drive a vehicle. So you're telling me people that drive to the polling place don't have a driver's license?
Well, the thing about it is that, you know, this is a big burden because some people don't drive. Some people can't remember where they put their license. Some people don't have, I guess you could also have a student ID. You could also have a public employee ID. You could use a public assistant ID. But, like, how it is, you get up and you can't figure out where you put your keys. Somebody gets up, voting day, they can't figure out where they put their ID, then they can't vote.
Well, let's talk about this again. Now, wait a minute. You need a government-issued ID to get into federal buildings.
Right.
You need a government-issued ID to drive a car. You need a government-issued ID to fly someplace. You need a government-issued ID to prove you're over 21 to buy alcohol. And you need a government-issued ID to get welfare. So you're trying to tell me in that vast world of government IDs, there's no way that somebody's not going to have an ID to prove when they go to vote.
Well, it's discriminatory because
discriminatory. How is that discriminatory?
It's discriminatory because if you're poor, you may not have the bus fare to go get an ID. If you're a student, you might not have the educational level to fill out the paperwork that to get an ID. You might have, like I said, you might lose it.
If you're a student, you have to have a school ID just to go in the library.
But maybe you can't figure out where you put it.
Okay, so you're trying to tell me even the people that are issued welfare, they don't have IDs, so that means we're issuing welfare checks to people with no IDs?
No, to get the welfare, they have to get an ID, but to go vote, they don't.
Oh, okay, so listen, what is this really about, Mark? Is there what did the state of North Carolina say in opposition to Mr. Holder?
Well, right now, there's also a couple other aspects of the law. They said also they don't want, they ruled against paid voter registration. So they said, look, you can't pay people to go out and register, because they had a lot of things in some cases. I guess what was it, like who was those folks? The Acorn, where they're registering Elvis Presley and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. Mickey Mouse.
They registered Mickey Mouse.
And dogs were able to vote.
Yeah, so basically they registered a lot of people who, because they're getting paid to register, right? So that one wasn't contested. But you could see, like, Elvis Presley would have a hard time getting.
Yeah, but if I went to the voter booth and I said I'm Elvis Presley and I'm on the voter roll, aren't they going to expect big sideburns and my hair up like this? I mean, I'm missing where.
They might be too young to even know who Elvis Presley
is.
Correct. That's might even know. But yeah, where's Elvis going to get an ID?
So I have a question. Even the illegals that come across the border, they get fake IDs so they can buy alcohol and do whatever they want. So can't they use a fake ID then?
Well, in California now, I think you can get a driver's license whether you're a citizen or not.
Well, let's not get to California. Let's go back to North Carolina.
Yeah.
So isn't this a basic right of the state to ensure that the people that are voting are legitimately citizens? We'll start there. And that if they're citizens, they should have a government ID. But by the way, there are state and federal laws saying you must have a government ID. So I'm missing the point where this is discriminatory at all when law-abiding citizens across this nation have government-issued IDs.
Well, I'm just saying that, obviously if someone's elderly, maybe they don't get out much, they don't have an ID, maybe it expired.
But how do they go for health care?
They get their check.
They get their check, but how do they prove who they are when they have to go to the doctor?
Well, see, and then, what's that? Well, how do they prove who they are
when they have to go to the doctor?
I don't know. Maybe they could find their ID that day.
Well, see, here's where I'm looking at. There seems to be a prevailing factor by this type of prosecution that indicates that illegal voting in the background is a possibility under overturning these types of laws.
That is the reason that North Carolina, that's the excuse North Carolina uses, that we want to prevent voter fraud. So not only
prevent voter fraud.
Yeah, that's the excuse they use for this type.
But that's such a bad excuse, right?
For all this kind of racist discrimination.
Okay.
But also they said, okay, you can't have same-day registration.
Voter.
You can't do early voting.
Well, are you talking about ballots, or you can vote wherever you feel like down at Joe's liquor store?
Well, that's Chicago. Vote early.
Oh yeah,
vote often.
Vote often.
Vote often. So they're prohibiting that. So really,
that's terrible.
If
but
you can't vote,
the cemetery is rising because all those voters want to vote.
No, but I'm just saying, if you can't vote early and motor around and vote, how are you going to vote?
I think we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. And so, Mark, I'm going to leave one last thought on this. The state has a right to check IDs at the vote. If you have to use an ID to drive your car, you need an